This is the former National Socialist death camp at Treblinka. In 1964, a huge monument was placed over the former death camp. These stones remind us of the towns from which came the Jewish communities that were destroyed. The death camp itself was dismantled when Treblinka was closed down. However, less than 2 years previously, someone had chosen Treblinka as a location where Jews from all over Europe could be murdered. It's probable that that person was Richard Thomalla. Richard Thomalla was the man who built the death camps at Bełżec, Sobibór and Treblinka. Thus, he was directly responsible for the killing of approximately 1.5 million people in those camps over a period of 19 months. The complete destruction of hundreds of Jewish communities who had existed for centuries in this part of Central Europe. As far as I'm aware, there have been no detailed studies of his life. Here, I'm going to give a brief overview of what he did, but there are lots of holes in this story, holes which I think are unlikely to be filled. Richard Thomalla was born on the 23rd of October 1903 in the village of Sabine, located to the southwest of Oppeln, today Opole in Poland. The village had around 700 inhabitants when he was born, but it was connected to the railway line between Oppelln and Neisse. In 1936, the Nazis changed a lot of names throughout the country, but above all in Silesia, to names that they considered to be more Germanic. So the foreign-sounding name to them of Sabine was renamed Annahof. Today, the village is called Sowin. The next village is Lambsdorff, today Łambinowice. In the 1860s, the Prussian army established a training area for artillery here. During the Franco-Prussian War, a camp for around 3,000 French prisoners of war was established here. During the First World War, there was a much larger POW camp, with some 90,000 soldiers of various nationalities passing through the camp. During the Second World War, Stalag 8B, Stalag 8F318 and Stalag 344 were all set up here and saw a turnover of around 400,000 POWs, half of them from the Soviet Union. After World War II, the camp was used to intern German civilians, as well as anyone the communist authorities took a dislike to. There's been a museum at the former POW and internment camps since 1995. Thomalla could speak Polish. Where he learnt it from, I don't know, but it's possible that there were Polish-speaking inhabitants where he lived as a child. Polish was the language spoken by many people in the countryside in Silesia, although further to the east of Sabine. The Polish-speaking population broke out in revolt 3 times following the end of World War I. This led to a plebiscite and the final border demarcation between Poland and Germany. Sabine, however, was some distance from the new border with Poland. Indeed, it was closer to the newly created state of Czechoslovakia. I've covered this plebiscite and the Upper Silesian Agreement in other videos. There are links below. Thomalla was a construction engineer by profession. On the 31st of July 1932, there was a general election in Germany. This election was a victory for totalitarianism, with more people voting for parties that wanted to install a dictatorship than for democratic parties. The Communist Party under Ernst Thälmann got 5,282,636 votes and 14.3% of the vote. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party reached its all-time electoral high of 13,745,680 votes and 37.3% of the vote. Thus, adding the Communist Party vote to the Nazi Party vote, that's well over half the population voted for one of these two parties. This made Germany virtually ungovernable. No working majority of the Reichstag was possible and lawlessness prevailed on the streets. That month, Thomalla had joined the SS, membership number 41206, and in August 1932 he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, membership number 1238872. In 1933, Hitler came to power. Owing to the lack of a governable result in the July 1932 elections, the country went to the polls again on the 6th of November 1932. Hitler's share of the vote dropped to 33.1%, or 11,737,021 votes. Nonetheless, a group of powerful conservatives around President Paul von Hindenburg persuaded the aging president to appoint Hitler Chancellor. They made the mistake of permitting a Nazi to control the Prussian police. In the space of a few weeks, Hitler was able to grab power and abolish the other parties through the use of terror on the streets and in the Reichstag. The National Socialists reintroduced military conscription in 1935. Despite being in his 30s, Thomalla did his military service in the garrisons of New Modlin and Opole, as they are called today in Polish. On the 5th of October 1935, he married Margarita Bruckner. Until the outbreak of World War II, he served in the SS in Lower Silesia, based here in Breslau, today Wrocław, and Wola, which is today Wołów. In September 1939, in the ranks of one of the Einsatzgruppen, he participated in the campaign against Poland. After its completion, he was assigned to the German occupation apparatus, part of which was the Selbstschutz, groups of Nazi-supporting members of the German minority in pre-war Poland. The Selbstschutz groups were financed before the war from the Reich, and not only did they work as a fifth column during the invasion of Poland, but they also committed horrific crimes against their former Polish neighbours. However, once the attack on Poland got underway, they were usually commanded by SS officers from the Reich. The Selbstschutz had assisted in the drawing up of a list of Poles who were to be arrested and usually killed following the Nazi takeover. Thomalla may also have served in the SS Hilfspolizei, that is the auxiliary police, in Częstochowa. On the 10th of December 1939, Thomalla was in Radom. Here he appears to have been deployed in construction work with Jewish slave labourers in that city. In August 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, which effectively allied Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union. Nazi Germany invaded Poland on the 1st September 1939 and the Soviet Union followed suit on the 17th of September 1939. Poland was destroyed. The Soviet Union took just over half of the country and a new border was established right down the middle of where Poland had been. Despite the army saying that this was not necessary, the SS came up with the idea of building a defensive wall on the border. These defences consisted of a major ditch which later proved to be no hindrance whatsoever to the Red Army in 1944. I think the idea of this was to assert SS authority in what is now the eastern part of the general government, the Nazi-occupied area of Poland. The SS was effectively a state within a state. The idea may have come from SS Brigadeführer Odilo Globocnik, or it may have even come from his boss, Heinrich Himmler. The construction of this wall was to be done by Jewish slaves. There are horrendous accounts of what happened to them, and because of the Ringelblum archives and other records from the Warsaw Ghetto, we know what these people went through. Thomalla was one of the engineers assigned to the SS Grenzsicherungsbaukommando, the Border Security Construction Commando. This had been established by SS Brigadeführer Odilo Globocnik. Thomalla was quartered in the village of Bełżec until the 21st of October 1940, which was at the very heart of this construction project. The building which I have in front of me is part of the first camp which was built at Bełżec. This camp was put here as a theoretical work camp. It was a camp where people were housed during the construction of the Otto line, which was a so-called defensive line near the new Nazi-Soviet border in divided Poland, occupied Poland, if you like. And the idea was not actually done by military people, but by Nazis and sadists who thought that they could put these gypsies and Jews to work. The idea was to build some kind of a anti-tank trench, which incidentally by the time the Soviets did get here, it caused them no bother to get past whatsoever. The Soviets as well constructed a sort of defence line as well on their side of the border, which gave the Nazis no problems at all getting past in 1941. There are photographs of this building which date back to the period when it was in use. So the idea of the compulsory labour is something we see which reoccurs within Nazi mentality. Jews must work, for example, as though they weren't working before. It's the victory of the uneducated Jobs who can do nothing other than manual labour over those who use maybe their heads or their hands to work. And that is precisely what happened with the Nazis. On the left here, we're coming up to a copse where people were murdered. Gypsies in the summer of 1940, Jews as well. And when they were no longer fit for work, which was maybe totally intolerable for most people, they could be taken in there, in that copse which existed at the time. I suspect many of the trees have been replaced, the new ones, but there may be still some old ones. In that copse, people were murdered. I'm very glad to see, I haven't been here for some years, I'm very glad to see that now there's actually a memorial up which you can see there. That's the gypsies who were murdered in the summer of 1940. Bring the camera around. It's very bright sunshine. It's evening here. It's a lovely day, the 16th of June 2013, and there we have the buildings from the camp. And this railway line here leads towards where the death camp was built later.
The initial plan was for 4 large camps, however no funding was available for it when Governor Hans Frank refused to finance such a large and useless project. Odilo Globocnik opted for various small camps which could be set up at next to no cost, as the prisoners would be doing the labour free of charge, and food could be obtained from the locals, or from the victims themselves. For example, there were collections in Warsaw, food to send to people who were performing slave labour on the Burggraben, or Otto line, as it was called. As the slaves were not kept in normal accommodation, no costs were involved here. The prisoners could be kept in barns, storehouses, outhouses, or even without cover. Diseases were rampant. Prisoners could also die of cold or starvation. Sometimes prisoners were able to escape to the Soviet-occupied zone of Poland. There are reports of individual Red Army soldiers assisting the escapees, but there are also reports of people being forced at gunpoint to return to the Nazi-occupied area of Poland. In 2000, I interviewed someone who'd found himself in this very position in 1939. The Nazis demanded that the Judenrat provide labour, and once news of how bad it was got out, people didn't want to go. In Warsaw, large sums of money could be paid to avoid being sent there. By the end of 1940, the Wehrmacht tried to put a stop to this ridiculous waste of resources. Some camps were closed, but Himmler managed to keep it alive and ordered Odilo Globocnik to finish the job.
In late 1939, the Nazis started rounding up people in the streets in Warsaw, for example, and we can see from the recollections of Cherniakov and others about what actually happened, the state which people were in, those that did return, or the letters from those that were brought here and to other places. The Jewish Council itself decided perhaps it ought to organise the people who were sent away for slave labour rather than let the Nazis do it, to make it somehow take a bit of the terror out of it or whatever. Of course, it just worked out was that the Jewish council was doing the Nazis' dirty work for them. One of the things that happened in the winter of 1939-1940, there was typhus broke out. Now, typhus is a disease which is quite difficult to define because it varies from language to language. From English to German to Polish, for example, it's different words. I won't go into that now, I've done it, but I've gone into it in the past. Now, during this outbreak of typhus, the Nazi cure was that to bring people to this pond here that we've got, and to force the people to be underwater, stay underwater for 2 minutes. I think it was 2 minutes, I can't remember. But anybody who failed to do that, his head popped up beforehand, was shot. And the people who were brought here were often in really weak condition anyway, so it'd be unlikely that they would survive this bath. And even if they did survive the time which had to be underwater, given that they were completely wet, again in winter, they wouldn't have stood much chance of much longer survival. Incidentally, the person who told me that was an eyewitness from here, from Bełżec. And from this spot here, you've got a view of the camp itself, which is there. The building itself, incidentally, is falling apart. You can see that from here. I've never actually been in that building there, that barrack. We tried to get in once before, but there was a dog looked a bit on the vicious side once we jumped over the fence, so we jumped back over the fence, quite sharpish.
Lobotnik was based in Lublin. He noticed the work of Thomalla at the SS Grenzsicherungs Baukommando, and he appointed him to the Central SS and Police Construction Directorate with an office in Zamość.
In den frühen Morgenstunden des 22. Juni trat die deutsche Wehrmacht in breiter Front zum Angriff an, die heimtückische Bedrohung des Reiches und Europas durch die bolschewistischen Verräter abzuschlagen.
On the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany turned on its Soviet ally. In the autumn of 1941, Thomalla was also here in Kiev, overseeing the construction of police and SS bases. From Kiev, he was also sent to Ziepel and Starokonstantinov. Richard Thomalla was recalled back to Lublin. Here he had the job that lay at the very heart of Nazi fantasies. This was the complete destruction of all the Jews in Europe. His job would be to build the camps which would lead to the destruction of the largest Jewish population in Europe, that of Poland. In part 2, we shall see what happened.